Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Repeateron, and today we're going to be going over all of the Scout overclocks. So we're going to be talking about each of them fairly briefly. I do have videos talking about each of them in depth, although some of them are older, so some of them aren't the most up-to-date. Some of these overclocks have been changed, as well as my opinion has changed on some of them. So this will be a little bit more accurate to how I feel about them now. Let's start this off by saying this is completely my own opinion. If you have a different opinion, that's perfectly fine. And then we go over the tiers real quick as to what they mean. S tier is overtuned, broken, crazy strong, the best stuff. A tier, solid, all around good overclocks. You definitely want them on there. They're really good. Sometimes they even outperform the S tier in certain situations. B tier, above average, very good overclocks. I like them. C tier, kind of the average overclocks, or you have to build specifically towards this overclock, and it can be a little bit awkward to use. That's usually where the things go into C tier, and then D tier are the ones that I wish would get buffed because they're usually kind of weak, or they only do one particular job really well, and I kind of would like them to be changed a little bit. So let's begin. We're going to start out with the GK2 assault rifle that the Scout starts out with, and our first overclock is the compact ammo. This gives you 5 more ammo, as well as it reduces your recoil by 30%. That's pretty good for the assault rifle. Recoil isn't too bad with the assault rifle anyway, but reducing it's kind of nice, and having more ammo in the magazine is good. This one's B tier. It's above average. I would definitely want it. Then we have the gas rerouting, which gives us increased rate of fire by 1, so we go from 7 to 8, and we get a faster reload time. The G2 already reloads quick. That faster reload is really nice. And having a faster rate of fire is also really good. You can actually stack up a pretty good amount of damage per second with this one. I don't think this one's crazy, but it does complement the G2 quite well. I would put this one on the high side of B tier, bordering on A tier. I could see people moving it up into A tier. It is pretty good. Either of these I could see people putting into A tier because they do make the G2 feel quite a bit better. Then we have the homebrew powder, which this one I'm not a huge fan of. I'm usually not a huge fan of the homebrew powder. At least for this one and for the Sabata. For the revolver, it's a different story because the damage increase is quite a bit more. And I really wish that these two would get that big damage increase as well, because this randomizes your damage between 80% and 140%, usually evening out in 110% bonus damage. Or I guess 10% bonus damage. So this one kind of messes with breakpoints if you're not building damage for the G2, which is a little bit annoying because that means there's chances for you not to one-shot things like swarmers, which swarmers can be pretty common, and when there's a lot of swarmers, you definitely want each bullet to be killing them. For grunts, it doesn't matter as much, and for other larger targets like Praetorians, this does help. Same with guards and same with slashers. So, and if you are going with a full damage build, then the breakpoints don't change on things like Swarmers, so you are one-shotting them, but you're not taking things like extra ammo or anything like that, which I find a little bit limiting. I'm not going to say this is as bad as the Sabata's one. It's still C tier for me, because I'm probably not going to be taking this. I think that it's kind of okay, but you need to build specifically for it, and I don't really like that specific build. I like having more flexibility in the builds. At least if I want a clean overclock. Up next, we have the overclocked firing mechanism. This increases your rate of fire by a lot. This increases by 3, but it doubles your recoil. As I said, the recoil isn't that bad with the G2. It's really pretty manageable even with doubling the recoil. And increasing the rate of fire makes your damage per second go way up with this. You do kill big things faster. It's still pretty manageable to be shooting one shot at a time if you really want to. And this one's all around pretty solid for the G2. I think that this one's probably A tier for it. Low end to A tier, high end to B tier, somewhere around there. And then our next overclock is Bullets of Mercy. Bullets of Mercy gives us 33% more damage on any target that is affected by any sort of status effect, whether that be burning, electrocuted, poisoned, stunned, or frozen. I'm not sure if this also counts towards the sludge pump's new slow either, because I don't think that's considered poison. I think that's considered something else. If it is considered poison, then it does count for this, and if it just counts as any status effect and this also counts towards it, then that's nice. Similar to like how stunned counts for this. So I think it does, but I'm not entirely sure. This comes at the cost of having 5 less ammo in your magazine. That's not a huge downside. Having 5 less ammo, you're going to be reloading more, but that's not a huge deal. Like I said, the G2 reloads pretty quick. You'll probably be running Born Ready with Scout anyway, because it's just kind of handy to have flares always there, and maybe to be reloading your secondary. So lower magazine isn't that big a deal, and increasing your damage by 33% is pretty big. It's also very likely that you're always going to be having something with a status effect on it. At least any large thing. Grunts, maybe not, but you'll be killing them quick enough anyway, so it doesn't really matter that much. It's very unlikely in a team for you to not have status effects like lightning, like poison, like fire. I mean, your cryo grenade counts for this. Your IFG, I think, counts for this. There's just a whole lot of ways to get Bullets of Mercy to trigger, and it is probably one of the GK2's best overclocks, I would say. I don't think it's S tier, though, because I don't think it puts the GK2 to like an amazing level, but it is a very high A tier. Then our next overclock is AI Stability Engine. This one I really love. This one is really cool. You lose out on damage, you lose out on rate of fire, but you gain 0 recoil. Your gun has no recoil anymore. It pretty much doesn't have any spread either. It's just right on where you're shooting. And you get increased weak point damage by 40%. Which, that's all really good. And you can build damage. You can also build up that rate of fire if you want. This one is really strong at just killing things at pretty much any range. It's very easy to hit weak spots with this, especially with no recoil, no spread whatsoever on the assault rifle. This one's just great. I love it. A tier. I'm not sure if it's better or worse than Bullets of Mercy. It messes with the G2 a little bit more than Bullets of Mercy, but I mean, being able to hit pretty much every shot or fire every shot exactly where you want it to go, that's pretty big in my opinion. And then our last overclock is Electrifying Reload. This makes it so we lose out on damage and we lose out on magazine size, but every bullet that we have that hits a target when we go to reload will then electrocute the target for a certain amount, as well as applying the electric status effect to it. This one can be good if you want to go with really high single target damage. You go like embedded detonators with the submachine guns. You can stack up tons of damage with this, especially against like dreadnoughts. Outside of that particular use, though, I find this one to not be super useful. It's okay in a group if you want to be supportive, but a lot of the time as Scout, you're probably not going to be with the group. You're not all going to be grouped up together all the time. Especially with you being Scout, you're probably going to be going off, finding more minerals, exploring caves, getting more stuff for the team because even though Scout can definitely hold their own, they're not as efficient at killing things like hordes as other classes are. So this one, I don't find it to be super useful to me, but if I'm taking it on like a dreadnought mission with embedded detonators with the submachine guns, yeah, I can do tons and tons of damage to them, especially if I'm taking the IFG too. You just get so much damage. So for that, I would put it higher than what I am going to put it. I'm going to put this in the high end of C tier because you do have to build kind of towards it, but it is pretty good. And it doesn't really come at that much of a detriment. You can get that ammo back, even though you probably don't want to. You want to go with reload speed so you can be triggering this more often. The damage, you're probably going to want to go back up to 15 just so you can kill swarmers, because it's kind of annoying to not be able to one-shot them. And then everything else you can build however you would like with the GK. So I would rather have this than not have it, or not have an overclock on the GK2. But I don't think I'm going to put it into B tier. I could see people putting it there. I could see people putting it up into A tier too, if you really like that particular build. And against like Dreadnoughts, yeah, it probably is like A tier. So starting out pretty solid all the way around with the GK2. Nothing incredibly strong, but nothing incredibly weak either. Pretty good spread here. Now we're moving on to the M1000, which this one has some really cool overclocks. First up is Hoverclock, and this one is super fun to use. This one may give you an advantage, or might just be fun to use. This one makes it so when you are in midair and focusing, you reduce your velocity, so you start kind of hovering and falling. It's called Hoverclock, but this only lasts for about a second and a half. This one's really cool. It's especially fun if you want to take special powder with it and have like a full midair scout using this, your grappling hook, and your shotgun to just fly all around the map, and maybe you're running hover boots too just to complete the build. Super fun to use. I don't think it's anything like overpowered or anything super crazy though. I think it's just a solid overclock. I'd put this one into B tier. I could see this one being argued for any spot here, though, really, because it doesn't necessarily improve your M1000 all that much, at least in terms of combat. You know, maybe in terms of fun, yeah, then this one is super fun. But in terms of combat, you know, it's kind of whatever. Then we have the minimal clips. This one increases your magazine size by 25%, which is handy to have because this actually gives you more ammo if you're taking the larger magazines in tier 3, I believe, or maybe it's tier 2. And you also get 0.2 seconds knocked off your reload time. Both of those are really nice to have with the M1000 because just more ammo in the clip and faster reloads are good in general. And this weapon you're probably going to be reloading a lot. I would put this one up into A tier. You know what? I'm going to put it right next to Bullets of Mercy. I think it's better than this one. Maybe not as good as AI Stability Engine, but you could argue it either way. Then we have the Active Stability System. This one gives you slightly longer reloads by half a second, so that's not way great. But your focus speed is increased by 19%, which is kind of useful. And your movement speed is increased by 70% while you're focusing. That is really nice to have, and it's a nice quality of life overclock for the M1000. Again, I don't think this is crazy. I don't think it's as good as minimal magazines, and I don't even think I would put it up into A tier, but I will put it high up into B tier. It's very good. I would much rather have this than just be running the regular M1000. Being able to have focus shots and being able to run around just as quick as we normally would. Maybe you're a little bit slower. I don't recall because I don't remember if aiming down sight slows you down slightly. But either way, it's not as much as it normally would be. Then we move on to the big boy here, Hipster, which Hipster is just pretty much insane. This one lowers your damage by 17, which isn't too bad because you can build your damage back up to where you can still be one-shot headshotting grunts, one-shot focus shot body shotting grunts, and you can also kill pretty much everything very fast. You get tons of extra ammo with this. You also get a almost double in your rate of fire, and you get half the recoil with it. You can build this so many ways. You can build it full ammo spam fire with like no recoil build. That's pretty fun. You can build it focus shot to where it's dealing damage and punching through multiple enemies and killing them. That's really fun. This one is just really overtuned. This one's S tier. I don't know if this one is... I guess it is overpowered because it is so overtuned. When they did buff this, they kind of over-buffed it, I would say. But I still love it. I love it to death. Yeah, definitely S tier. Then we have Electrifying Focus Shots, which is our first unstable overclock, and this makes it so your focus shots apply electricity, which deals damage over time, but this lowers your focus shot damage by 25%. This one is good if you want to be supportive, similar to like the electrifying reloads with the assault rifle. You can build it if you want to do heavy damage with like the submachine guns because they have the bonus damage towards electrocuted targets. You have those options, but I don't find this to be as useful as just building full damage for the M1000. So I would probably also put this one into C tier with the assault rifle. I could see it being argued for B or A tier though. It can be good. And if you want to be supportive with your class, then it's a pretty good option. Especially if you don't want to be super accurate with this either, because you can hit anything anywhere to electrocute it. So you don't need to be the best shot or anything like that. And if you run like focus speed increase, yeah, it's pretty good. Plus you can still one-shot grunts with it. So it doesn't mess with your breakpoints or anything like that. At least with regular shots. Focus shots it kind of will. And then our last overclock is the supercooling chamber. This one cuts down on your ammo by a lot. Cuts down by about a third. Your focus shot speed is decreased by 40%, so it takes longer to use a focus shot. But your focus shot damage is increased by 125%. You also can't move when you're focused. There's some upside, but there's a lot of downside to this one. And this one is really punishing if you are not the most accurate. This one really benefits from you being the most accurate, taking your time with shots. And this one is really good on Dreadnought missions. Outside of that, it's honestly not that great. It just takes too much away from the gun to be super useful. It's good if nothing's focusing you, or if you can keep getting to positions to where nothing can get to you quickly and you're taking these shots fast and making them accurate. Outside of that, this overclock is pretty lacking. I would put this one into C tier. It depends. If you are really, really good at taking your shots, if you can be really accurate, and maybe if you're only taking this on Dreadnought missions, I would say that it's higher. Outside of that, this one's going to be pretty disappointing to you, I would say. All right, then moving on to the Drak 25's overclocks, we have the impact deflection. This bounces your rounds once. This works on surfaces and on enemies. This one's really good, especially if you take Plasma Splash with it. This one's like A tier for me. I really enjoy it. Then we have the thermal liquid coolant. Cools your gun down faster and you get less heat per shot. Both of which are great and both of which the Drak really needs. Or really benefits from. And another A tier, it's similar to like the firing mechanism with the GK2, where it's really nice to have. Then we have the rewiring mod, which is still kind of awkward to me. It is potentially as ammo efficient as Hipster, but the way in which you have to use it is a bit weird because you have to overheat the gun to get your ammo back. So you can do this by either just shooting the gun until it does overheat or using manual heat dump to get the ammo back, but you have to be above 50% heat. It's just extra steps, but it is fairly ammo efficient. You do get a lot of value out of this. So I would put it high B tier, but it's still B tier for me. Then we have aggressive venting, which aggressive venting makes it so once you overheat the gun, you do fire damage to all enemies around you, as well as you likely light them on fire, or at least you do the heat damage so they might catch on fire. You also fear all enemies within a 5-meter radius. Your cooling rate is not as good with this one. This one, and it also takes your ammo. This one is not my favorite. This one's probably our first D tier here. It's just the way in which you want to use this. Usually against crowds, it doesn't work particularly well against big things. Against crowds, you have to run into crowds and then hope that the fear scares enough of them away, or you're running the hot feet so you can run away with this one. There's just better overclocks for doing this. There's better overclocks for fighting hordes than this one. It is kind of fun to use. It is funny to watch Scout just run into a whole group and use this to catch them on fire. However, it's not uncommon to see Scout get shot up from the team because he's running into the horde. And it's also not really all that uncommon to see him just get downed from doing that because so many things hit him as he goes to do it. So it's kind of weird. It's probably best if you are running this with the cryo grenade, where you can use the thermal shock from it and kill a bunch of enemies that way, or if you have a driller on the team with a cryo cannon, in which case, even with cryo grenades, I don't think this one's way great because you don't get very many of them. You only get the 4. You can kind of do it with cryo minelets with the submachine guns, but that's a little bit less consistent. And if you do have like a driller with a cryo gun and they're just using the cryo gun, especially if they're using like tuned cooler, then this one is better. It's probably then like B tier because you can kill enemies very, very fast, at least large groups of enemies. But outside of that, in solo, it's really not that good. The other thing you could run it for is having a full elemental scout, because then you can have it doing fire damage with electricity damage. You can have cryo grenades for freezing, like we've discussed. So you can have all of that if you want, but it's rather underwhelming for me. Especially when we have another better fire overclock here. Then we have the overtuned particle accelerator. This increases our damage, but increases our heat per shot, and it also makes our spread much worse, both in vertical and horizontal. So we start firing out pretty much a cone of plasma, but we do a lot more damage, and it's really good at that close to medium range. It shreds through crowds very fast. This is probably, besides maybe the impact deflection, Scout's best option for crowds. Again, that kind of depends, because maybe Bolts of Mercy could be good if everything's getting frozen or everything's on fire. For the most part, this one is really strong for that, and I would put it up into A tier. Then we have Shield Battery. This gives you increased ammo, increased velocity on our shots, and increased rate of fire. Our increased rate of fire and our increased damage from this only comes if we have a full shield. And we do need a fully complete shield. So we can't have even a little bit, we can't even just have 1 point of our shield missing. So if you take a little bit of fall damage, it doesn't work. Friendly fire doesn't work. Grenade fire, it doesn't work. Step into fire on the magma core, it doesn't work. Step into mushrooms on the fungus bug, it doesn't work. Shield disruption, it's a complete nerf to your gun then, because this does double the amount of time that your gun overheats. And if you do overheat your gun, you lose out your shields. That also means if you use the manual heat dump, you also lose out shields completely. It's just, this one is so situational. Even in solo, it's not that great because you have to be micromanaging it so much. In multiplayer, it's really not good because it's just so easy to take friendly fire damage. Even if you're not taking that much friendly fire damage, like if, your driller uses their flamethrower a little bit too close to you and it touches you once, you don't get any bonuses. If your gunner splashes damage a little bit too close to you with something, or hits you with a rocket or whatever it might be, no damage. It's just not a great overclock. I'd put this one into C tier. You can get a lot of value out of it, but again, you have to micromanage it so much that it's just not all that fun to use. And then our last overclock is the thermal exhaust feedback. This makes it so our gun overheats a little bit faster than normal, as well as when our gun does overheat, it does take longer to cool down. But once we hit that 50% mark or higher, we're doing fire damage, as well as we're burning targets, setting them on fire, and this increases the higher that our heat gets with the gun. We get a lot more damage per second with this particular one, and this one is really good. I would put this one up into S tier. It's a low end of S tier, but it is S tier. Very strong against single targets, very strong against crowds. Once you get it down to where you need to be shooting, where you're just trying to flutter the heat to where it's not overheating, but to where it's not cooling down too much, this one is really strong. Now we're moving on to our secondaries for Scout, which our first secondary is the jury-rigged boomstick, the double barrel. And double barrel has a really weird spread of overclocks, but let's talk about each of them. So our first one is compact shells. And compact shells just gives you 6 more ammo and knocks 0.2 seconds off of the reload time of your double barrel. Really solid overclock. I really like it. I would put this one up into B tier. You could argue it being an A tier. It's good. You get nothing but bonuses from it, and the shotgun benefits from having a couple extra shells, and having that faster reload time is nice, unless you're taking like the auto reload on tier 5, in which case it's not as necessary, but you'll still probably be reloading your shotgun every once in a while. Or if you're running Born Ready, maybe not as useful, but still, it's a bonus. Then we have double barrel, which this one is pretty awful. This one gives you 1 more damage and then makes it so every time that you shoot the shotgun, you have to fire out both barrels. Some people have said that this can be good against like single targets, which, yeah, that would be the best thing to be using it on, like Praetorians, Dreadnoughts, stuff like that. But at the same time, in your tier 2, you could just go with a faster rate of fire and fire both barrels out pretty much at the same time. The 1 point of damage really doesn't matter, and anytime you want to use this against a single target, a single grunt, a single Mactera, a single whatever it might be, even into a crowd, you might not want to be firing both barrels because one shot might kill multiple enemies. This just cuts down on your ammo efficiency, and it's just not as good as any of the other overclocks for the double barrel. So this one is also D tier. It should really have a much bigger increase in damage if you have to fire out both barrels every single time that you shoot the shotgun. Then we have special powder, which is pretty much everybody's favorite, it seems like. This gives you absolutely no bonuses besides being able to fly around the map with your shotgun. If you jump into the air and fire your shotgun, you'll go flying backwards. If you point your shotgun at the ground, you'll go flying upward. If you point your shotgun into the sky while you're falling and you shoot it, you'll probably break your legs and die. Because you'll just hit the ground so much harder. This one, it's super fun. It can be super useful too, especially if you're somebody who really likes running hover boots with Scout, which I know plenty of people do, at least before they get this, because this one can effectively be your hover boots and free up a active skill slot. This is great when combined with the grappling hook because you can go really anywhere you want. So if you're trying to get like fossils or mushrooms or whatever it might be high up on the ceiling, you can grapple right up there, grab it, not even worry about your grappling hook coming up in time before you hit the ground. Just pull out your shotgun, shoot it at your feet just before you're about to hit the ground and reset your fall. And you likely won't take any damage or very little damage. You can use this to bounce yourself up higher. It does free up a lot of ways, and it's super useful for just getting around the map. I'm going to put it into S tier, although it's the low end of S tier. You could also argue Overclock is up there. You could also argue this is anywhere else, because if you're not using it for that, it doesn't give you too many increased advantages in combat. Potential increase in combat, because you can fly away from hordes, or you can, fling yourself backwards to give yourself a little bit of room before you take off running. it also means you don't have to switch to your grappling hook as much, so I guess S tier. I guess I'll put it there because everybody loves this thing. So then we've got stuffed shells as our last one, which gives us 1 more point of damage and 1 more pellet. This one is just all around better than double barrel. If you just want to use something like double barrel, just take the faster rate of fire in tier 2 and you pretty much have double barrel plus an extra pellet on top of that, which increases your damage by a lot. This increases your total pellet count to 9 base and your base damage from 12 to 13. So you're doing 13 damage over 9 pellets, not counting any other bonuses you got. This is really strong. This one's A tier. I really like it with the shotgun. It just makes the shotgun even better than it already is. Then we have the shape shells. Shape shells decreases our pellet by 1 count, so we go from 8 pellets to 7, but it halves our total spread, so our shotgun becomes very accurate, especially at medium range. You can use this extremely effectively against Mactera. It's very good against big things. I really like the shape shells. I would put this one like up into A tier. I wish it didn't take away that 1 pellet, but even since it does, it's not a huge deal. We can always take the more pellets in tier 3 and be fine. And then our last overclock is jumbo shells. This one increases our damage by a lot. This one gives us 8 more damage, so we go from 12 to 20 damage. We lose out on 10 ammo though, so less sustained damage, I guess, but more burst damage. And our reload is half a second longer. That's not too big a deal, especially if you build full ammo for this. This is really damaging towards anything big, especially if you get right up next to it. Praetorians, dreadnoughts, oppressors, anything like that, you can completely destroy with jumbo shells. And jumbo shells is just one of my favorite. I'd put it up into B or A tier as well. I could see it being argued for like B tier because maybe something like stuffed shells you could say is a little bit better than it, a little bit more effective, especially against like hordes. But if I'm only going to be running this for big damage things, like if I'm going to be running it in combination with impact deflection, I already got my horde, figured out, and I've got just heavy damage at close range figured out. And then our last weapon to check out is the Zhukov submachine guns. And first up, we have minimal magazines. Minimal magazines gives us a little bit faster rate of fire, which is kind of handy, and faster reloads by 0.4 seconds, which the Zhukovs already have really fast reloads, so that's even more nice. This one's a solid all-around overclock for the Zhukovs. B tier. No real downside there. Then we have custom casings as our balanced overclock. Zhukovs are kind of weird in their overclocks too, but custom casings gives us 30 more magazine size. So we go from having 50 combined magazine size to 80 combined magazine size, but we lose out on rate of fire a little bit. We go from 30 rounds to 26. We're still shooting really fast, and that extra ammo is actually really useful in the Zhukovs. I don't know if this is one of the best overclocks for the Zhukovs, but it's all around a pretty solid one. I would put this one up into A tier. It's probably sitting on the low end of A tier, but it still makes the Zhukovs feel quite good, at least if you're fighting hordes. Even against single targets, this one's not bad. Then we have the cryo minelets, which cryo minelets make it so we lose out on clip size and we lose out on damage slightly. We lose out on 1 point of damage and 10 overall magazine size. But we get cryo minelets that they hit the ground, they burst, and then they freeze enemies, or they'll add cold to enemies, potentially freezing them. This is going to be more difficult the larger the enemy is, obviously. This one is really good, especially if you go with the blow through round, so you can punch through enemies and then have the cryo minelets go off underneath them. Freezing enemies is always useful. This one is a little bit more difficult to be using super effectively, but it's still really good and I really like it. I think I'm going to put this one to the very high end of B tier. It's bordering on A tier for me. I know plenty of people would probably put it into A tier or even S tier, because it does have a lot of utility, especially if you want to take it with something like Bullets of Mercy or even something like Minimal Clips. You got plenty of really good options. Then we have gas recycling. Gas recycling increases our damage by 5, so we go from 12 to 17, which is a really big buff for these weapons. Our base spread is increased by 50%, which is kind of a big deal because the Zhukovs are not the most accurate guns in the game, so their range is even shorter. And you lose out on all weak spot damage, which you only had 15% to begin with, so it's really not that big of a deal that you're missing out on that little amount of damage. You still can do weak spot damage. I know some people think that this completely cancels out your weak spot damage. It doesn't. You're just not doing that bonus 15% that you would, which, before you were doing 15% of 12, so or I guess 15% of 24 usually. Not a huge deal a lot of the time, but you also lose out on movement speed too. So you only move 50% as fast as you normally would. If you're taking the in and out, where when you go to reload, you get more movement speed, this really doesn't matter all that much, and this is really good against hordes. If you're using it particularly for that, or even against single targets, it's pretty good. I like gas rerouting quite a lot. I would probably put this one up into A tier. I think it's all around pretty solid. I think it just has some misconceptions about it, that some people think that it cuts out your damage, or it cuts your damage like in half or something. It really doesn't. It cuts down your damage, at least on weak spots, slightly, but you get a lot more burst damage. And then our last overclock is embedded detonators, which this one cuts your damage in half. You only get 6 damage out of 12. That really doesn't matter with this. Your ammo is cut down by 400, which that does actually matter quite a bit. It would be nice to have a lot more ammo with this, and usually that's how you want to build it. Your combined magazine size is also cut down from 50 to 30, but you do get embedded detonators. So when you go to reload your guns, any shot that you've already hit into an enemy will then explode, dealing damage to them. It deals damage for each bullet that hit them, and you can stack up a ton of damage. The explosive damage is 38 damage per explosion, so you're stacking up a lot of damage. So losing out that damage on your main shot doesn't really matter. You're only going to want to be using this for big things, Praetorians, Oppressors, Dreadnoughts, stuff like that. And this one is really good. I don't know if I want to put it into S tier though, because if it didn't take away so much ammo, it probably would be S tier. But since it takes away so much of it, that is kind of annoying. You don't have it for other enemies. You're probably using this just for big things. If you have a good weapon for killing hordes, like you're running the overtuned particle accelerator, you're using the impact deflection, you're using bullets of mercy, it's really good. Especially if you're taking on dreadnought missions, then it's really, really good. Or if you want to take it with like electrifying reloads on dreadnought missions, or electrifying focus shot on dreadnought missions, really strong there. I think I'm going to put this at the very high end of A tier, up with bullets of mercy. I don't think that these two are quite S tier. Or I really like these ones right here are quite S tier, but they are very high A tier. They're all really solid overclocks that just come with a little bit of downside. And I don't think that they're too overtuned. I don't think that they're too overpowered, quite like these other ones up here. Maybe special powder. So I think this is where I'd put all of the scout overclocks. As you can see, we got a lot of really good ones in A tier. We got some good we got some good ones in B tier. Some really strong ones in S tier, and then some other ones that, are iffy in C tier, and some other ones that just aren't way great into D tier. But that's just kind of how it is. Next time we're going to be looking at the gunner's weapons. Well, we're going to be doing the Hurricane overclock build. Then we're going to be looking at the gunner ones. And then we're going to do all the weapon overclocks again. Then we're going to be doing them again in terms of how fun they are. So plenty of stuff coming up with Deep Rock. Hope you guys are enjoying this. Thanks so very much for watching it. I really do appreciate it. Special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube and my patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos like this. And if you would like to be a part of that, you can. There are links down in the description. So remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!